However, our speaker today is representative from House District 72 from Winston-Salem, and one of the closest Democrats we have to us here to come speak. So you got a whole wide open field, people interested in knowing what you got to tell us about. Take it away, Dr. Baker.
Well, first of all, I want to just say good morning to everyone and thank you, Mr. Hoy, for the invitation. I'm super excited to be with you this morning. And I will say that whenever someone reads kind of my resume, I always say, who are they talking about? Because ultimately, I'm just a servant. First, a servant of teachers and children, and now I love every morning when I walk into the General Assembly. I say to what I call the true Ninja Warriors. There's two ladies that work at the front desk. Um, Good morning, and I am humbled to be able to serve you this morning to do the people's work. So I am real clear that it is both an honor and a privilege to walk through those doors 3 days a week to be about the people's business. And even though we're not in the majority, it still does not stop us from fighting and bringing up issues with problematic laws. I got shut down. They suspended debate on me twice this week because they got caught up in their own bills. They didn't know what was in the bills and didn't understand the impact of the bills. So if you guys watch or listen, you will often hear me speak on the floor, particularly around issues of education. I've been an educator for over 25 years. And so education is what I know. I'm a naturally inquisitive learner. So oftentimes when I'm reading bills, there may be questions in the bill. The one came before us this week, and I had never heard the term before. And it was about a study on exactions. And I didn't know what that meant. So when I asked the bill sponsor, explain to me exactly what does that mean? He could not explain that. And I said to him, then why have you brought a bill before us that you cannot explain exactly what this study will be doing? So it's still passed out of committee, but they're often just frustrated with me and other legislators who ask the tough questions, who bring up the issues that are important for people to hear. And on Thursday, I said it was a great day to see so many of the legislators brilliantly argue against very bad bills, from eugenics and helping them to understand the history of eugenics and the inflammatory nature of that, and being exacting and actually um, using a dog whistle to talk about the extinction of certain groups of people based on superiority, to argue about a bill that is going to again create situations in which you have an overrepresentation of students of color being put in alternative educational systems, to just bills that have become more restrictive in what they are allowing cities and local municipalities to do in terms of governing their respective provinces. So I said it was a good day because I often say to my colleagues that we may not be in the majority, but that doesn't mean we don't fight. That the people that have sent us here know that it's an uphill battle, and sometimes we win. We do win. And so we have an obligation to raise the issues and fight. Um, and as a first time freshman legislator, I didn't know what the protocols were, and I didn't know what I was expected to do and not do. And really that's good, because we all come with one vote, whether your vote is 18 years old or 27 years old or 1 year old, that we have each have one vote, and we have the obligation to use it to the best of our abilities to not only benefit our respective districts, but the reason why I enjoy conversations like this is that ultimately we are making laws that affect the entire state. So yes, I first have an obligation to District 72, but ultimately I have a obligation to the people of the state of North Carolina. So that is what I keep at the forefront of what I get to do every day. It has been interesting. A couple of weeks ago, it was declared that the honeymoon period was over. And I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I assumed that it was getting ready to go all downhill from there. And we are really starting to see that occur. And I think something that really is important that Mr. Hoy said is that we have got to organize and organize now. We lost a lot of good races in a sense that this year we had a lot of strong candidates that were running to overturn seats. So it wasn't for a lack of qualified candidates that we lost races. We have just got to be better about messaging. And so since so many of you are in the communities, and I did take a look at that website, it is great. You're on social media. I would strongly encourage you to continue to remind folks, both in person and electronically, that many of the things that they are affording now, whether it's the stimulus check, whether it's money that's coming into the schools and into the cities for infrastructure, whether it's money that's becoming available for small businesses, that they should thank a Democrat because not one Republican voted for the American Rescue Plan. And I think that we've got to remind folks that the quality of life always gets better for everyone when the Democrats are in office. And so I think it's never too late to um, convey that message. And again, it's never too late to get not only voters registered, but to make sure you have a plan for how to get those voters to the polls. I know in the urban centers, we have a lot of people that don't have transportation necessarily that can get to the polls to vote. And they're not real sure about who they should vote for. So messaging is critical for us. And how we do it, we need to do it in an organized way and a systematic way, and making sure that we are hitting home those same points that people, no matter if they're in Rowan or if they're in Guilford or they're in Forsyth, if they're in the hills, that they are hearing the same two or three key points about what it means when Democrats are in party, when in power. And I think that that is the one thing that we know that the other side does brilliantly. And oftentimes their messaging is built on lies and half truths and mistruths. But there is such a consistency in the messaging that eventually people start to believe those things that they are saying, hence how we arrived to the insurrection that occurred on the Capitol. That they have been using the same messaging for so long that when the clarion call came out, people were already predisposed to that. So it's enough about that. I know I'm preaching to the choir. And so I've been kind of given a couple of things to talk to you guys about, and I'll start or continue with this whole idea of what it means to be a freshman legislator. And when I was running, one of the questions that I was always asked about was, well, what do you want to achieve in your first 100 days in being there? And I said, figuring out how to get to the bathroom. Like, I can't make any promises about what I want to do in the first 100 days because the learning curve is so steep. And so it is really a steep learning curve, trying to learn all the processes, the procedures for getting your bills filed, protocol on the floor. I don't have a staff I have a legislative assistant and I who um, run our office. So even that process of finding someone who's not family, most people have family members that work at as their legislative assistant. My daughter is in healthcare and she needs to be there because we need more great people in healthcare. So finding a person that has a good match for you in terms of personality and work ethic. And then um, I am naturally an introvert. Um, I can be extroverted because of the work that I do. So for me, it's much more difficult in how to figure out how to begin to build those relationships and form those bonds to move your work and your bills and building consensus both within and without of the party. And I'm fortunate enough that one of our representatives is a Republican who I've known for a number of years. Our daughters were really good friends in elementary school. And so we still philosophically disagree on a lot of things. But I continue to reach across the aisle to him to help him to get him to co-sponsor certain bills in hopes that those bills will move. And so we've been able to co-sponsor several bills that are not only coming out of our district, but we're seeing in other districts as well in terms of calendar flexibility. And now is the time for us to be able to have those conversations. I know with Rowan, you guys are a renewal district, which gives you charter-like flexibility. I know a little something about that because the school that I was in was, well, we, that name has kind of morphed. And so we were a part of the Restart District that also gave us that charter school-like flexibility. And having run a charter school, a public charter school, I think that's important for people to know that charter schools are public schools. One of the great thing about public schools is that autonomy to make decisions based on the needs of your student population. And I think giving districts now that ability to make decisions around what is best for the start and stop of their schools and not be held hostage because of the tourist industry is important. Um, we have had a great opportunity with um, COVID to now begin to reimagine what public schools can look like. We saw that there were many limitations to the way in which we have continued to educate children. And so we are due for a major overhaul for education. Many of you may know this, but we are no longer an agrarian society, yet our calendar is still built on the harvest cycle. We are no longer really training our students to go work in factories. We heard our governor talk about all of the new industries that are coming to our state and are being created. There are so many jobs now that wasn't even available 5 or 10 years ago. Yet we continue to educate our children based on that model of them going to work in factories. And so we've got to begin to rethink that. Our 6.5 hour day, again, um, is based on the needs of industry. So, is it possible to do longer days and year round? And sure, it is, but it has to look different. We can't extend our days, extend our hours in school, an 8 hour day, and it be more of the same. So, being creative about how we deliver both critical content and enriching types of activities for our children. And when we look at failing schools, we often look at failing schools in a silo as a singular event. We obviously need to fully fund go back to fully funding our public educational systems and bringing the pay rate not only up for our teachers, but our state employees, our teacher assistants, our educational support people, because we are in a crisis in terms of being able to recruit and keep educators in our state. So I think that it's important for us to fully fund our schools. And but that's just one aspect of it. Oftentimes, when you look at schools that are not successful, um, successful based on what? And so, oftentimes in our state, we look at a singular measure. How did a child do on a singular day for testing to measure the success or failure of a school? And so, there was a couple of bills that have been introduced for us to look at a more holistic approach to assessing whether or not schools are being successful with moving children, with how they do on a standardized test as being one measure. So you also have to look at many other indicators to determine whether a school is successful or not. And I always use myself as an example, that I was at the elementary school, my most recent school, as an administrator for 12 years. And when I came into the school, we had 225 students, pre-K 5, with 45 of those students being on the um, pre-K side, so about 180 students. And so over the years, we had doubled in enrollment. At one point, we were 70% male. We had over 125 students from 19 different schools in the district, but we were not a district-wide magnet. Yet, almost every child that came to the school were 2 or 3 years behind. So, in terms of looking at our success with proficiency, we continue to hover around the bottom, but we met or exceeded growth every year. So if you just look at that singular measure, you would think that we were a failing school. We were often labeled a failing school, but in reality, we were one of the more successful schools in the district because we were taking children from all over the district. And filling in those gaps and holes and creating opportunities for students to be successful. And many of them have gone on and had successful middle and high school careers. And I have children now that have been that are attending college, have graduated from college, and have gone on to live full and productive lives. But we didn't just deal with the students in the classroom. We had to build support systems with our families, finding out what some of their needs were, and that's really where the bulk of my community activism came, is finding out what our parents needed and connecting them with the resources, whether it was to finish school to get GEDs or to get training so that they could access jobs that would allow them to make gainful employment, whether it was helping them navigate through the judicial system because they had nonviolent felonies, but because they had those felonies on their record, they couldn't vote, they couldn't get housing, they couldn't get financial aid, they couldn't access um, any kind of governmental assistance. So our school did the first expungement clinic with students from Wake Forest, and now that is a service that is offered now with the Wake Forest law students, but helping them to get those records expunged, thereby opening up a plethora of resources for them. So when we look at schools that are not successful, and I work with administrators who are in turnaround situations, I often tell them that you have to do a mapping of all the needs. And I think that once you do that, then you know how to support those families. Because until we can create upward mobility situations for our families, we're going to continue to have schools that are not as successful with moving our kids to higher ground in terms of educational achievement. So we can't continue to just look at money being the only resource. It is most certainly one of the most important resources that we need. But we've got to begin to equip our administrators with how to partner with community agencies and advocates to help us create better schools. And then equipping our administrators, because they are the gatekeepers of the climate in the school, about how to deal with students in terms of providing them with culturally relevant instruction and teaching our teachers how to deal with students who have different backgrounds from themselves. Um, and so that is key to the work that I do. And in understanding, I am a nationally certified Ruby Pain trainer, and the Ruby Pain's work is important in a sense that it deals with the hidden rules and the impact of poverty. And we know that poverty knows no color, but it stops short of dealing with the cultural piece. And I remember when I was going through my training, I had an opportunity to ask Dr. Payne about why didn't she ever deal with the cultural piece. And she said to me that as a middle class white woman, I did not feel that it was adequate or even appropriate for me to address that from the lens of being a white female. And uh, and I always kind of appreciated that answer because then it helped me to understand that when I present her work, I have to also present it in the context of here's the work and the framework around poverty. But then I have to layer this cultural piece so that you can understand the skills you need to be able to connect with your students. Um, and so that kind of took us from freshman student to my love of education. I see a question. If you give me a minute. What is your position on having Bible classes in public school? Here in Rowan County, are you aware that there are several schools that have Bible classes? These classes are not part of the public school budget, but are funded by local churches. But the classes are part of the school curriculum. I don't know. I I don't know how. Hmm, I was gonna say I don't know how they do that, but I think that you can always have both student and adult led prayer and Bible classes that are completely optional. And as a woman of faith who loves the Lord, um, I pray every day, not only when I leave my home, I have often walked the halls and prayed in my building. And so I think that your faith is important for getting you through. Much of what we're dealing with today requires us to have a grounding in that. I think that you can offer that, and again, as long as it is completely optional for students and or adults to participate, I think that that is great. I think if the curriculum allows for you to study the Bible as a historical document and not necessarily from the standpoint of indoctrination. I think that also can be done. It's a fine line though, but you can study the Bible as a historical document and not in the religious aspect of for conversion. And so I think if you are going to do that, you have to make sure, particularly as it pertains to the curriculum piece. Again, and when you're talking about Bible classes, I assume, or Bible study, it has to be completely optional, and it has to be based on student or teacher or staff led. So hopefully that answered your question. Um, and so, any more questions before I kind
Yes,
of?
I have some. You
Okay.
used some words that uh, can kind of zip through us real quickly, and if we're not careful. You made reference to eugenics.
Mhm.
Now, I've read enough about Darwin and social Darwinism, etc. I know what you're referring to there, but I'm not sure if everybody knows how prevalent, the teaching and thinking about eugenics influenced life here, particularly in the South, because eugenics dealt with racism on steroids. So that's one word you used. And the second one you referred to expungement as you referred to judicial system. Um, if you could spend some time unpacking those two words, I think it would be helpful.
Sure. So I'll start with the expungement piece. I think that, and I'll try not to go too deep with the eugenics piece, but with the expungement piece, what that is a process, an appeals process for anyone that has certain violations on their record, usually around misdemeanors and certain types of misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies, certain types of felonies. And what an expungement does is it allows the person who has those offenses on their record to apply to have those offenses removed from their police record, thereby sealing it. It also then, if it is expunged from their record, then the person no longer has to um, on the question where it asks about being convicted, they no longer have to answer that as a yes, because once they um, are successful with the expungement, it basically gives them a clean record. And so again, that process is important. Because it ties up so many of the resources. One of the bills that I was attempting to introduce that got folded into another bill was we are currently, as a result of the pandemic, there's these moratoriums on evictions. And so right now, people are pretty safe in terms of being evicted and what that will mean. But we are reopening and we are moving back to business as usual. So when those evictions start, those people who end up with evictions will have a record of those evictions, which will keep them from being able to, in some instances, access housing. And so we didn't have an expungement process in place that would allow those not students, I'm sorry, would allow those individuals with those evictions on their record to have a pathway to expungement. So the bill that I was proposing would allow those evictions to stay on their record for a total of 5 years. And then there would be an automatic expungement process that would take place that would remove those evictions off the record. So when you think about getting in trouble and being allowed to kind of deal with whatever consequence that occurred as a result of that trouble, and then be given an opportunity to have a fresh start. That's really what we're talking about with expungement. When we're talking about eugenics, it's that natural selection of a higher, believing that there are certain people that are more superior genetically than others. And Darwin really dealt with the natural selection of the more superior being. And so Hitler used eugenics and the thinking that the Aryan nation was more superior, particularly to African Americans, Jews, um, homosexuals. So basically, he kind of set the blueprint that um, the white people were the more superior race. And so the reason why that it's important to kind of understand what eugenics is that it was a bill that passed out of the House on yesterday that deals with eugenics around Black women and their ability to carry forth a child or abort a child. And they buried that in the bill around protecting pregnancies where potentially a child has been identified potentially as having Down syndrome, and blocking the ability for the child to be aborted based on possible Down syndrome or autism. But also taking away um, the rights of women of color to make that decision, and that would be a decision that would be made on their behalf. So again, that was one of those brilliantly argued absurdities on our side. Of course, it failed. It got very heated because when we talk about the system of racism, people tend to want to internalize that as being called a racist. We're not calling you a racist, but we have as a country put systems that have historically and continue to oppress certain groups of people based on systems designed to do that. So it did pass out of the House, and it's headed over to the Senate. We hope it dies on the Senate side because it's a horrible, horrible, horrible bill. Um, and so hopefully, and if you have any follow-up questions to that, then I would most certainly um, be open to answer. But did I cover that for you? Is that good?
Yeah, I just, you made reference to Hitler. It was interesting for me to find out that in the late 20s, early 30s, as the Nazis rose to power, they sent delegates to the Jim Crow South to find out
Mhm.
how to do it. And,
Mhm.
um, that's rather damning to American history. So
Yeah.
I see two other questions coming up here. Somebody saying, what is the number of the bill you are referring to?
Uh, let's see if I brought that home yesterday. It is, I want to say it is Bill 650, 653.
That's House Bill 653.
House Bill 653. I will double check that. I have my phone up too, so I can check. Well, I can do two things at once. So I'm gonna check it while we're also talking. I also um I see a question they're asking me about what committees I serve on. While I look this up for you, I serve on the Appropriations Committee. I serve on Appropriations Capital Committee. I also serve on Family, Children, and Aging Policy, Regulatory Reform, and State Government. And I will also tell you that if you have not been to the ncleg.gov website, and I'll put that, let me go ahead and put that in the chat. Um, there is tons of information um, on that website um, in terms of you can look up members, you can see what committees they're on, you can see what bills they've introduced, you can see how they voted, you can go in and listen to not only a session, but you can go in and listen to um, the committees as they're meeting. You get to see the agenda. So it is tons and tons and tons of good information out there. Let me see. And I will give you, let me give you the bill number. I think it is 653, but I want to double check that for you. Let's see. Yeah, because we're up to 900 bills that have been filed this year. So we're moving right along. Thursday, we go into what is called this crossover. And I'm going to try to explain this to you. I'm still trying to understand it, but basically, as I understand it, the reason that our sessions have been running so long this last week, and into the first 3 days next week, is that um, we've been trying to get as many bills out of committee onto the floor for the vote, so that we can get them over to the Senate side, and then they're forced to vote on all of our bills over there, and they're doing the same. And so after Wednesday, we won't be able to, um, and there will be no more bills that will be able to come out of committee, and for the purpose of making sure that all the bills kind of get over. And so they said that the next week or so, not this, the next 2 weeks really, this week and next week is really pretty intense as we move to try to get all of the bills crossed over and voted on so that we can move into budget talks. And so, yeah. um, So, I cannot put my hand on that bill number, but I think it is 653. I thought I had put the calendar from yesterday that had the all of that information, but I must have left it on my desk. But you can go in, and it is the eugenics bill. It actually has eugenics in the name, and you can put it in as a keyword search and it will come up for you. Yes, yes. And part of the question in the chat was eugenics continued in North Carolina until the mid 20th century. Not sure of when it ended, maybe the 1960s. One of the stains and dark part of our history in North Carolina was the sterilization project. And I don't know how many of you are aware of that, but that did deal with the sterilization of the intentional sterilization of Black women as part of this eugenics project, and it did go well into the late 60s. Someone put the House bill. It's House Bill 453. Any chance that the ERA could get a hearing? Um, I do not know. I want to say probably not. I was one of the co-sponsors on that bill um, to try to get some energy on it. It went nowhere. They sent it straight to rules, which is where they say bills go to die. And if we don't get it heard, by Wednesday of this week, that we can't refile it until the next biennium. So probably not. There's some bills out there to raise the minimum wage for um, particularly school employees, but all employees to the $15 an hour. Probably won't get any energy on that. We need to put a little bit of pressure on the legislators. We have over $6 billion between what is in our rainy day fund and what's in our reserve fund. Um, and 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 I most certainly in budget talks will ask if this does not constitute a rainy day for our district with what we're dealing with right now. Please explain to me what a rainy day is. So I am ready for that battle because I think even if we release $1 billion from the rainy day fund to help provide some relief again, not only to small businesses, um, but housing relief, abilities for cities to refurbish some of their coffers in terms of the monies that they've spent to try to provide a quality of life for people that live in their cities and municipalities. So to me, $1 billion released or to build on what we're getting for COVID relief, um, I think is an opportunity now for us to do right by all of our citizens because To me, it doesn't have a good look for us to brag about the amount of money that we have sitting in our reserves when so many people across our state are hurting. Um, let's see. How optimistic are you about limiting gerrymandering in the upcoming districts redrawings? What are the chances of ever establishing an independent commission to do the job? To the first question, I am not hopeful at all, um, because one of the things that I continue to say, and you to our party, is why do we continue to play nice in hopes that they're gonna um, do right by us when they've shown you that they're not? They're telling you that they're not. And so they're not going to do anything in terms of trying to draw equitable lines, because, as Mr. Hoy said earlier, we're dealing with voter suppression. We're dealing with decreasing people's ability to vote. So they most certainly are not going to be moral and ethical in drawing lines that are that are equal or fair lines. And I think, if we did that, we would get back to much better quality of politicking. Because if you draw the lines, in my opinion, and I what do I know? I'm just a teacher now playing a politician. Uh, but if you draw the lines equitably, and then it's the best man win. Like, you get out there, you present your side, I present my side, let the voters decide, and the best man wins. And then, every 2 or 4 years, you're gonna have to fight to be sent back. But we know that that's not going to occur because they don't fight fair, and they're not going to fight fair, and they're telling you they're not going to fight fair. And so they don't want an independent commission because they don't want somebody to say, you've got to get out there and convince people why they need to vote for you versus stacking a district. And I would say the same thing if we were in power. I would say the same thing, that we need to create equitable lines, and may the best man, woman, or child win. And every 2 to 4 years, you just have to convince people to vote for you. So I'm not hopeful on any of those cases. And at this point, us taking the high ground and always trying, because we're on the right side of every issue. We're on the right side of education. We're on the right side of the environment. We're on the right side of providing people with quality health care. We're on the right side of making sure that people have um, a fair, are able to create a fair and equitable living situation based on quality of pay. We're on the right side of people's ability to make decisions about what's best for their bodies. So we're on the right side of all those issues, but being on the right side of those issues have not yielded us the votes that we need. So we have to now fight like never before. Being on the right side of those issues have not gained us the wins that we need. And so we've got to get better about messaging. Yesterday, I tweeted out a post that if you received a stimulus check and you're thankful about the money that's coming into your schools and the money now coming into your state, into your cities for infrastructure, you need to thank a Democrat, because not one Republican voted for the American Rescue Plan. So we have to remind people, because they most certainly are now going back into their respective districts and taking credit for all of that when you didn't even vote for it. So I think that we've got to be more aggressive about how we do it. And we can't just do it to each other, although we've got to do two things at once. We've got to continue to energize our base, um, while also expanding the base. And then we may not change people's um, uh, philosophical belief, but we know that it's possible. It happened with President Obama. People that had not voted Democratic before, um, crossed over and voted. This time, people voted for President Biden that were Republicans. So I do think that there is a space in which we can step into to begin to not only energize our base, but to expand that base. And there's no safe districts. So I tell uh, them all the time in Raleigh when we're having these conversations and they talk about safe districts. I'm supposed to be in a safe district, but 35% of my voters are independent voters. And so if we get a charismatic Republican who can energize that independent base, then we've lost this seat. So we need to always be um, on the attack. We need to always be forward thinking in a sense that we have lost our rural areas because they had traditionally been democratic, but somewhere we stopped speaking to the needs of those that lived in those districts. So how do we get back to saying we are the party that's going to fight for you to have a better quality of life? Um, and so that's kind of where I am with that. Right. So no, what I didn't say is that um, before I got saved, thank you, Lord, I was a physical fighter. I wouldn't back down from a fight. I wouldn't go looking for a fight. I wouldn't start a fight. But by golly, if you brought one to my front door, I was not gonna back down. And it was pretty successful. And so now that same sense of fight, that same sense I jokingly say the running joke from me up there is, and you'll get this if you've ever seen Dirty Dancing. Um, no, baby's not going in the corner. You can't put baby in the corner. So baby's not gonna be quiet. You're not gonna put me in the corner. And so every chance I get, I'm gonna fight. And I might not win, but by golly, you're not gonna be able to say that you didn't know, no one ever told you. And so I believe that once you know, you have an obligation to now do something different because you know better. Um,
One of the things can I just say amen?
yes, yes, you can.
And you're hearing that from a retired Lutheran pastor saying amen. Okay. I ain't a Baptist, but you're hearing it. You said something early procedurally, and I don't know if people caught it. You said that the Rules Committee is a place where things go to die. Tell us a little bit about the way the legislature is structured with the power of the speaker, particularly in relation to the Rules Committee. And you can just say, well, I put together this good bill. I had a good co-sponsor. It was bipartisan, but it just went to die. How does that happen?
So once bills are filed, right, they are introduced, what they call first reading. And those readings usually occur whether we're actually in session or whether we have pro forma session, which means that no votes will be taken. But statutorily, we have an obligation to convene. And so during the introduction piece or the first reading of a bill, it is at that point that the speaker determines where that bill goes. And so I have a bill, I have two bills that are not dead yet. And he actually referred, one of the bills went to K-12. It's about raising the dropout rate from 16 to 18. And the other one is to bring some money to the city to allow community organizations that have been providing tutorial services and interim services while children were in the remote learning situation, to allow to provide those services for the students in the summer. And that bill actually got sent to appropriations. So that's why I said those two bills are not dead yet. He didn't send it right to rules, but the speaker, when the bills are introduced, he determines, the pathway. And sometimes a bill can be sent to rules, and then you can go and kind of lobby the people in rules and try to get it out of rules, and maybe get sent to a committee for debate, and then get it voted with a favorable report out of a committee, and then it goes back to rules to be reassigned back to the floor. So rules is kind of the gatekeeper of what bills get in and what gets out. Um, and so a lot, we're passing a lot of bills, and they like to frequently talk about the number of bills that has bipartisan support, and that is true, but half true, because 98 to 99% of the bills that we're passing with bipartisan support are Republican sponsored bills. So it is true that there's a lot of bipartisan support occurring and a lot of bipartisan bills being passed, but they're their bills. So very few of our bills are making it onto the floor for a vote. And that's all at the direction of the speaker. Um,
And the speaker is named by the majority party.
Correct. And
So it's a very extremely powerful position, and why we have to elect more Democrats.
absolutely. And so that was one of the first things after we were sworn in. They have what's known as an organizing meeting, and it's basically we vote on the minority leader. And then there was a real vigorous discussion around whether or not we as a caucus was going to vote for the majority leader. We could have decided not to vote for the majority leader, but we still would have been outvoted. So we do vote, eventually vote, and they can nominate themselves in terms of who wants to run for that speaker position. And ultimately we would vote on that. And I would say that behind the speaker, the next most powerful position procedurally would be your rules chair. Because again, um, that is how the flow of bills move. They move in and out of the rules office.
Okay.
Let me just. There is. Is there a question about? Yes, there is a bill that did get voted. I can't remember if it got voted out of the House about raising the marriage age. Uh, and I cannot tell you, I cannot remember, but that bill, there was a bill that was filed for that. And I want to say that it did get passed out of the House, but it failed. Someone said it failed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember.
You can
Um,
get married at 14 here in North Carolina.
Correct. And this bill was, I think, raising it to 17. It
Yeah.
was edged to 17. Can you speak more about the dropout rate? So yes, the reason that I introduced the bill about raising the dropout age from 16 to 18 is right now, as you know, there is no process for a student who wants to drop out of school once they turn 16. They simply just stop coming to school. Um, and excuse me. And they don't have to notify the school of their intention to drop out. They just stop coming. And if they're of age, there is no recourse that a school can take or a district can take to have that student re-engage in learning. Well, we know that at the age of 16, there are really no options for a young person that does not have proper education. And I worked with one of our local judges who does juvenile court. Often the young people that she sees in her court are high school dropouts. It limits their ability to get employment. So raising the limit to 18 at least puts them in a better position in terms of they can now maybe join the military. The school can work with them to maybe do some kind of training program um, with maybe the community college or helping them to learn a trade. So keeping them in schools of those 2 additional years gives that young person a better opportunity to be more successful in life, where they may not have had those options at 16. And so that was the reason that we wanted to really have them raise the limit to 18. And part of the bill also talks about the school having um, kind of a justification for what they did to try to meet the needs of the student if they knew that the student was in crisis and in jeopardy of dropping out. And I know firsthand, having worked in elementary, middle, and high, um, that we can reach children at all three of those and help them to become successful. I often would tell my secondary colleagues that I am one of those stories that at the last possible opportunity to turn my life around, I was a senior when I'm not from here originally. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, and we moved here my senior year. And I was a student in crisis, having dealt with a number of life issues that had kind of just built upon itself over the previous couple of years. And so was just angry and crying out. I tell people often, particularly educators, that child that's acting out is probably a child that's in pain and they need you to see beyond their behaviors and to begin to look at that source of pain because it's that cry, that's a cry for an attention, for attention. And that was me. Um, and so with this mouth that I had and the temper that I had and just a inability to deal with foolishness, I just stayed in trouble. Um, and I had an assistant principal who was into restorative practices before there was a word for it. And he just refused to give up on kids. And he just refused, if at all possible, to suspend a child. And so, having gotten into a really bad fight with two sisters that cut off four of my mama's tires over a boy, then I could not have let that go. Um, he, instead of suspending me, which he could have, um, he made me work on who was to become the first Black county commissioner in our city. And I didn't understand then, as a high school student, volunteering, phone banking, driving the van on voters' days to go around pick up voters and take them to the polls, getting out on Saturday mornings and registering voters. I did not understand then how um, being a part of a grassroots campaign would later come back to serve me as I built my own campaign. And then to have a high school counselor who was white, the assistant principal was Black, having a high school counselor who was not assigned to me see some value in this student who was always in the office for trouble. And to say to me, what are you going to do after high school? Where are you going to go to college? Again, for all intents purposes, I was not that student that you should have been talking to me about going to college. And so she introduced me to Howard University. I'm first generation college, so I did not understand the importance of her talking to me about Howard. I wanted to go back to Kentucky. I wanted to be around my family and my friends and those things that I knew that was familiar to me. And so, my mouth was not pleasant, and she wasn't offended by that. And basically, when you finish with your foolishness, I need you to answer this question. So again, not understanding years later when I would become an educator to help teachers stop being offended by the things that children say. You never been cussed out before? Okay, well, now you can put that and check that off of your bucket list. But you cannot get into a power struggle with a child because you're the adult. You win by default. And then to have my junior English teacher, who was a white male, not be offended by the things that I was writing in my journal because, again, I was a child in anger and I was writing about my experiences. And he would hand me my journal entries back and he would say, Baker, you write really well. You need to think about doing something with that. Um, this was a really good topic. You need to think about going to college. Again, he was my junior English teacher in my senior year. And so I tell people that three people in my senior year single handedly changed the trajectory of my life. Um, my guidance counselor forced me to apply to Howard. She went to her co conspirator, which was assistant principal, and said, she's refusing to do this. Can you make her do this? And he was like, yeah, I'll call her mother. Right. And so those three people, both black and white, changed the trajectory of my life. And so I only say that to say that we've got to make it difficult for kids to check out and hold adults more accountable for seeing them beyond kind of where they are in their young life trying to figure this all out. And I think we have gotten away from that. It's so much easier for us to send them to alternative schools or suspend them. And so my hope is that we teach the teachers how to re-engage, how to build those relationships, how to reinstill a sense of hope in a generation of young people that are hopeless. And I'm a living witness to that. So, how far along is the current voter suppression bill? Can it still be tweaked? I'm especially concerned about provisions requiring an absentee ballot to be received by the BOE 2 full weeks before election day. So I will tell you on that bill is moving on the Senate side. Um, they have not introduced that. I have not seen that being introduced on the House side. And I don't know if the strategy is to get it passed on the Senate side and have it come over as part of crossover on the House side. But I have not seen the bill on the House side. Now, with that being said, I know that rules met Thursday night. I have not seen what bills will be on the calendar for Monday. They are also scheduled to meet Monday morning. So there can be bills with that moving through the House. But I have not seen that on the House side. In terms of it being tweaked, well, you can always offer amendments to a bill even as they're being debated. So it's still not too late. Um, Many people might decide they need an absentee ballot within these 2 weeks and would be shut out. Again, I totally agree with you on all of that. But as the other side so eloquently says, elections have consequences. And as long as we are not in control of anything, then we can't move anything. And I also tell people, don't just email and call us. Put the pressure on the other side as well, because we're your allies. But the pressure, and here's what I'll say to my educators in the room, because this is what I really got to thinking about. We were able to pass a bill on Thursday that I'm really proud of, and that is for all of our educators, you'll understand this. We cannot use personal leave for personal matters without paying for our subs. So if we want to use personal leave, we have to pay $50 to help offset the cost of the subs. So what you have are people who do not wish, not all, but some who don't feel like it's right to have to pay $50 to use your personal leave, which is not. So they call it sick for something other than being sick. So the reason for passing this bill is because we should not penalize teachers who have personal things that they want to take care of or need to take care of, and it doesn't fall under personal leave, and they can't use annual leave when it's a student day. So now, if we can get this bill passed on the Senate side, now educators will have opportunity to use personal leave simply by letting their administrator know what they need to use the leave for, and then they don't have to pay the $50. So you can't tell me that every educator is a Democrat, because they're not. But if we don't help, again, people on both sides of the aisle to understand who's fighting for you. So the educators who may be on the other side need to be putting some pressure on the Republicans to bring, weight to bear of why they've got to be more decent about bills, particularly around education. But this is one where we needed educators who are Democrats and Republicans alike to be on the same page about moving this bill. And so what I'm nudging the women on our side to do, and I, women do things differently. Let me say that. And I think that if we're going to break that gridlock that exists in Raleigh, it's going to take the women to do it. And I simply mean by what I mean by that is that women are more likely to try to come together and find some consensus around things that we find in common, whether it's around being a mother, whether it's around being a woman. And so, what I'm really trying to encourage is that we begin to reach across the aisle and say, what are some of the things that you're passionate about? How can we begin to work together on some of that? And we've seen some of that starting to occur. So I think that if we can give the Republican women the power to begin to speak up and to understand that their voices and their vote is just as important as their male counterpart, I think that we can begin to crack that stronghold that exists on the other side that does not allow for people to um, have independent thought or think outside of what the party line is. And so I'm hopeful that we can um, create a crack in the line by building some commonality around women's issues.
Well, we are certainly glad that you are there building cracks in the system, cracks in the glass ceiling, and pushing, to recruit Republican women to realize, hey, they're women too, and they count, and all the issues you've addressed. Thank you very much. Thank you for being in there and keeping up the fight. Um, if need be, punch him in. No. I didn't say punch him in the nose, but fight in the best sense of that word. And you obviously know something about how to do that. Um, we just keep going on talking about good things, and we want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. Everybody's clicking in saying great information. Thank you. We appreciate you. You can all go to the little reaction button on your screen and hit the clap hands. Oh, okay, do the clap hands, or you can just do this.
And I will say again, I know I'm preaching to the choir. We have an uphill battle, but I think we can do it. We've got to stay united. We've got to stay on message. And we've just got to expand the tent, get our young people. One of the things that I'm trying to do is to make sure that we're sending letters out to all of our first time registered voters, Democrats and Republicans. Because as a young voter, initially you vote, you register to vote under the party of your parent. But I really think that young people they're really pushing back and pushing against, not all of them, but quite a few of them. They don't want to live in this divided nation. They have grown up more integrated than ever, and they want to see that continue. So that's what I would say. We've got to expand our base, and so I thank you for having me.